Picture this. A billionaire can walk into any airport VIP lounge without question. But sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you'd never expect. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about kindness. It's about how one black woman's simple gesture at an airport terminal exposed something that will shake you to your core. Before we dive into this incredible true story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this need to be heard. It was a rainy Tuesday evening at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and 34-year-old Kenya Washington was exhausted. She'd been working double shifts as a nurse at Cook Memorial Hospital for 3 weeks straight, and all she wanted was to catch her delayed flight home to Atlanta. But sometimes, the universe has other plans. As Kenya sat in the crowded terminal scrolling through her phone, she noticed an elderly white man struggling with his luggage just a few feet away. He appeared to be in his 70s, well-dressed in a wrinkled suit. But something about him seemed, his hands were shaking as he tried to lift his heavy suitcase, and Kenya could see the frustration building in his weathered face. Most passengers walked by without a second glance. The busy airport atmosphere seemed to swallow individual struggles whole. But Kenya had been raised differently. Her grandmother always said, "Baby, kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything." She approached the man with a gentle smile. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need some help with that?" The man looked up, startled. His pale blue eyes were watery, and she noticed he seemed disoriented. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm lost." Kenya's heart went out to him immediately. "What's your flight number? Let me help you find your gate." He fumbled through his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled boarding pass. "Flight 45 into Denver," he said. "But I can't remember how I got here." That's when Kenya realized this wasn't just about heavy luggage. Something was seriously wrong, and this elderly man needed more help than she initially thought. As Kenya examined his boarding pass, she noticed his name, Harold Morrison. The departure time showed the flight had already left 2 hours ago. Her nursing instincts kicked in immediately. This man was showing clear signs of confusion and memory loss. "Mr. Morrison, when did you arrive at the airport?" she asked gently. Harold's brow furrowed as he tried to concentrate. "This morning? Yesterday? I was supposed to meet someone, but I can't remember who." His voice cracked with frustration and fear. Kenya guided him to a nearby chair, her mind racing. She'd seen this before during her years in the emergency room. Elderly patients with dementia or Alzheimer's, scared and disoriented. But something about Harold's expensive watch, his quality clothing, and the way he carried himself suggested there was more to his story. "Do you have any family I can call?" she asked, pulling out her phone. "Anyone who might be worried about you?" Harold shook his head slowly. "My wife passed 2 years ago. I think I have children, but I can't remember their numbers." Tears began forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry for being such a burden. You probably have somewhere important to be." Kenya took his weathered hand in hers. "Mr. Morrison, you're not a burden. We're going to figure this out together." She glanced at the departure board. Her own flight was boarding in 30 minutes. She had a choice to make. But as she looked into Harold's frightened eyes, the decision was already made. Some things are more important than catching a flight. Kenya made the call that would change everything. Instead of boarding her flight, she walked with Harold to the airport's customer service desk. The representative, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, looked overwhelmed by the busy evening rush. "We need help," Kenya explained. "This gentleman missed his flight and seems to be experiencing some memory difficulties. Is there any way to track his travel history or contact information?" Patricia sighed, clearly dealing with multiple crises. "Ma'am, we can't release personal information without proper identification. If he can't remember his details, there's not much we can do except contact airport security." Harold's face paled at the mention of security. "Please, I don't want any trouble. Maybe I should just find a hotel. With what money?" Kenya thought to herself, noticing Harold seemed to have no wallet or credit cards visible. She made another decision that surprised even herself. "Mr. Morrison, my flight was canceled anyway due to the weather. Why don't we go get some coffee and figure out your next steps?" As they walked toward the coffee shop, Kenya's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. Kenya, saw the news about the weather delays. Take tomorrow off. You've been working too hard. Perhaps this was meant to be. Over coffee, Harold began sharing fragments of memories. He mentioned living in a big house in Colorado, something about a company, and employees who depended on him. But the details remained frustratingly elusive. I feel like I'm forgetting something important, he said, staring into his cup. Something that can't wait. Kenya was about to respond when a news report on the nearby TV caught her attention. The headline read, "Missing Billionaire Businessman Sparks Nationwide Search." But before she could read more, Harold suddenly gripped her arm. "That voice," Harold whispered, staring at the TV screen where a news anchor was speaking. "I know that voice." Kenya turned up the volume on her phone to catch the broadcast. Harold Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, was reported missing by his security team after failing to arrive at a scheduled board meeting in Denver. The 73-year-old billionaire, who's been battling early-stage dementia, was last seen leaving his Chicago hotel this morning. The coffee cup slipped from Kenya's hands, shattering on the floor. Harold Morrison wasn't just any lost elderly man, he was one of the wealthiest individuals in the country, and apparently half the nation was looking for him. "That's me?" Harold said quietly, a mix of recognition and confusion in his voice. "But I don't understand. How did I get lost? Where's my security detail?" Kenya's mind raced. Morrison Industries. She'd heard that name before. Weren't they the company that had recently donated millions to healthcare initiatives? The same company that funded the new wing at her hospital. Her phone suddenly rang. It was her colleague, Maria, calling from the hospital. "Kenya, girl, you won't believe what's happening here. There are FBI agents and corporate security people asking about some missing billionaire. Apparently he has connections to our hospital, and they're checking everywhere." Kenya looked at Harold, who was now watching the news report with growing clarity. "Mr. Morrison, I think we need to call someone. There are a lot of people very worried about you." But Harold held up his hand, a strange look crossing his face. "Before we do anything, I need to tell you something. Something about why I was really in Chicago today. It wasn't for a business meeting." Kenya felt her heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" Harold's eyes cleared for a moment, more focused than she'd seen them all evening. "I came to find someone who saved my grandson's life 3 months ago, and I never got to thank her properly." Harold reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. With trembling fingers, he handed it to Kenya. The headline read, "Local Nurse Saves Boy's Life During Family Vacation Emergency." Kenya's breath caught in her throat as she saw her own face staring back at her from the photograph. The article detailed how she had performed CPR on a young boy who had nearly drowned at a Lake Michigan beach during her weekend off 3 months ago. She remembered the incident vividly. A family vacation turned nightmare. A child who wasn't breathing, and her training kicking in automatically. That's me," she whispered, looking between the newspaper and Harold's now tears-filled eyes. "That boy," Harold said, his voice stronger now, "was my grandson, Timothy. My daughter Sarah never got your full name or contact information in all the chaos. We only knew you were a nurse named Kenya from Chicago. I've been trying to find you ever since." The pieces began falling into place. Harold's business meeting in Denver was actually a cover story. He had come to Chicago specifically to search for Kenya, to thank the woman who saved his grandson's life. But his dementia had caused him to become confused and lost in the process. "I've been carrying this article everywhere," Harold continued. "Sarah wanted to set up a scholarship fund in your name, but we couldn't locate you. When my condition got worse, I became obsessed with finding you before." He paused, the weight of his diagnosis hanging in the air. Kenya stared at the man she'd been helping for the past several hours, realizing that their meeting wasn't random at all. Harold Morrison, one of the richest men in America, had been looking for her. But the story was about to take another turn that neither of them could have predicted. Within an hour of Kenya's call to Morrison Industries' emergency line, Chicago O'Hare Airport transformed into a media circus. News vans surrounded the terminal, and reporters crowded around every entrance. Kenya found herself at the center of a story that was quickly spreading across social media. Harold's security team arrived first, a group of professionals who were clearly relieved to find their charge safe. Behind them came Sarah Morrison, Harold's daughter, who immediately embraced both her father and Kenya with tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it," Sarah said, holding Kenya's hands. "Dad has been talking about finding you for months. When he disappeared this morning, we thought..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters wanted to know everything. How did Kenya find Harold? What was their conversation like? Did she know who he was? Kenya, who had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, found herself thrust into a narrative much larger than a simple act of kindness. But Harold, despite his confusion earlier, seemed to gain clarity as the evening progressed. During a brief press conference, he insisted on speaking directly to the cameras. "This young woman," he said, his arm around Kenya's shoulders, "represents everything that's right with this world. 3 months ago, she saved my grandson without knowing who we were. Today, she saved me again, without knowing who I was. That's not coincidence. That's character." The video clip would go viral within hours, shared millions of times across all social platforms. But for Kenya, the real impact was just beginning to unfold. As they prepared to leave the airport, Sarah pulled Kenya aside. "There's something else you need to know. Something Dad hasn't told you yet about why finding you was so important to him." Sarah led Kenya to a quiet corner of the VIP lounge while Harold was being checked by the medical team. "My father is a proud man," Sarah began, "but his diagnosis has changed his perspective on what matters most. Finding you wasn't just about saying thank you." She pulled out her tablet and showed Kenya a detailed document. "This is the Morrison Foundation's newest initiative, a $50 million healthcare scholarship program, specifically for nurses and emergency medical professionals. It's called the Timothy Morrison Second Chance Fund, named after my son." Kenya's eyes widened. As she scanned the document, the program would provide full scholarships for nursing students, fund continuing education for current nurses, and support community healthcare initiatives nationwide. "Dad wanted to announce this program with you by his side," Sarah continued. "He believes that everyday heroes like you should be celebrated and supported. But there's more." She scrolled to another section of the document. "The foundation wants to offer you a position as the program's director. It would mean traveling the country, identifying worthy recipients, and helping build the next generation of healthcare heroes. The salary is..." She showed Kenya the figure. Kenya stared at the number, speechless. It was more money than she'd ever imagined earning. But more importantly, it was an opportunity to impact thousands of lives. "I don't understand," Kenya said finally. "I just helped an elderly man at an airport. I did what anyone should do." Sarah smiled sadly. "That's exactly why Dad knew you were the right person. In a world where people film themselves doing good deeds for social media, you helped a confused old man with no cameras rolling and no recognition expected." Harold approached them, looking more like the powerful businessman he was, despite his condition. "Kenya," he said, "I may not remember everything these days, but I remember people's hearts. Yours is exactly what this world needs more of." But as the night continued, one final twist would test everything Kenya thought she knew about herself and her future. 3 days later, Kenya sat in her small Chicago apartment, staring at the contract that would change her life forever. The media attention hadn't died down. Her story had inspired thousands of people to share their own acts of kindness using the hashtag #KenyaKindness. But something Harold had said during their final conversation at the airport kept echoing in her mind. "Real wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give away and the lives you touch." Her phone rang. It was her supervisor from Cook Memorial Hospital. "Kenya, I know you've got some big decisions to make, but I need you to know something. After your story broke, we've had over 200 people apply for nursing positions here. They all mentioned being inspired by your example. 3 of them are giving up higher-paying jobs in other cities just to work at the hospital where the airport angel works." That evening, Kenya made her choice. She called Sarah Morrison. "I want to take the position," she said, "but with one condition. I want to spend 6 months of each year working regular nursing shifts in different hospitals across the country. Not as a publicity stunt, but because I never want to lose touch with why I became a nurse in the first place." Sarah's delighted laughter came through the phone. Dad said you'd say something like that. He's already approved it. 6 months later, at the first Timothy Morrison Second Chance Fund Scholarship ceremony, Harold Morrison stood on stage, his condition stable thanks to new treatments his wealth could afford. As he watched Kenya present scholarships to 50 nursing students, he whispered to his daughter, "She saved Timothy's life, but she saved my soul." In the audience, a young nursing student named Marcus from Detroit held his scholarship certificate, tears in his eyes. He had grown up in poverty, never dreaming he could afford nursing school. Now, because a nurse showed kindness to a lost old man at an airport, his dreams were becoming reality. Kenya looked out at the faces in the crowd, future healers, helpers, and heroes, and realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves of change. The true measure of wealth, she had learned, isn't counted in dollars. It's counted in lives touched, dreams enabled, and the endless ripple effects of choosing compassion over convenience. And it all started with helping a confused elderly man find his way in a crowded airport terminal. But Kenya's story was far from over. 2 weeks after accepting her new role, she received a call that would test everything she thought she knew about her new position and the Morrison family. "Kenya, this is Detective Rodriguez from Chicago PD." The voice on the other end was serious. "We need to speak with you about Harold Morrison and the circumstances of your meeting at the airport." Kenya's heart dropped. "Is Mr. Morrison okay? Has something happened?" "He's fine, but we've received some concerning information. Can you come to the station today?" At the police station, Detective Rodriguez laid out a series of photographs and documents across the table. "Miss Washington, we've been investigating some irregularities in Mr. Morrison's recent activities. There are questions about whether his disappearance was as accidental as it appeared." Kenya stared at the detective in disbelief. "What are you suggesting?" "We have security footage showing Mr. Morrison at 3 different locations throughout Chicago that day, apparently lucid and purposeful. He met with several people, including a private investigator. It appears he may have orchestrated the entire confused old man scenario." The room seemed to spin around Kenya. "That's impossible." He was genuinely confused, frightened. Detective Rodriguez slid a document across the table. "This is a contract between Harold Morrison and a private acting coach, dated 1 week before your airport encounter. The coaching sessions were specifically for portraying memory loss and confusion convincingly." Kenya felt sick. Had she been manipulated? Was the entire heartwarming story just an elaborate deception by a billionaire who wanted to control the narrative around his charitable giving? But then Detective Rodriguez showed her something else, security footage from the hospital where she worked. "This is from 3 months ago, the day after you saved Timothy Morrison. Watch the timestamp." On the screen, Kenya saw Harold Morrison entering her hospital, clearly alert and oriented, speaking with the chief of staff. The conversation lasted over an hour. Kenya left the police station feeling betrayed and confused. Everything she thought she knew about her encounter with Harold Morrison seemed to be crumbling. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. "You know," Sarah said simply, "the police called us too." "Is any of it real?" Kenya asked, her voice barely controlling her anger. "The dementia, the confusion, the scholarship fund." Sarah led her to Harold's study, where the elderly man sat behind an enormous mahogany desk. But this wasn't the confused, fragile person from the airport. This Harold Morrison looked every inch the powerful CEO he'd been for decades. "Kenya," Harold said, rising to greet her, "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me more than that," Kenya shot back. "You owe me the truth. All of it." Harold nodded slowly. "You're right. Please, sit down. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I promise you, everything I'm about to say is the absolute truth." He walked to a wall safe, retrieved a thick folder, and placed it on the desk between them. 3 months ago, when you saved Timothy's life, I did exactly what I told you. I tried to find you to thank you. But what I discovered during that search changed everything." Harold opened the folder, revealing detailed background reports, financial records, and surveillance photos. All of Kenya. "I'm a billionaire, Kenya, but I'm also a father who almost lost his grandson. When I started investigating you, I didn't just find a nurse who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I found something much more significant. He slid a medical report across the desk. Do you remember a patient named Marcus Williams? 8 years old, came into your ER on Christmas Eve. Kenya's breath caught. The little boy with the heart condition. His family couldn't afford the surgery. That was my grandson's best friend. Timothy never forgot how sad he was that Marcus died because his family couldn't pay for treatment. Timothy made me promise that if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure no child ever died because their family was poor. Harold opened another section of the folder. Over the past 4 years, I've been tracking the outcomes of every case you've worked on. Do you know what I found? Kenya shook her head, still processing the revelation. You have the highest patient advocacy rate in the state of Illinois. You've personally helped secure funding for over 200 families who couldn't afford treatment. You've worked with social workers, charity organizations, and even reached into your own pocket, money you couldn't afford to spend to help strangers. The folder was filled with testimonials from families Kenya had helped, thank you letters she'd never seen, and documentation of her impact that she'd never known existed. But that's not the most remarkable thing I discovered, Harold continued, his voice growing emotional. The most remarkable thing is that you did all of this without ever seeking recognition, without ever asking for anything in return, and without ever knowing that anyone was paying attention. Kenya felt tears welling up in her eyes. I still don't understand why you had to deceive me. Harold's expression grew serious. Because, my dear, I needed to know if your character would hold up under pressure. I needed to know if you would help a confused, lost elderly man when there were no cameras rolling, no reward waiting, and no recognition to be gained. You see, Harold continued, the Morrison Foundation isn't just about scholarships, it's about something much bigger. I'm dying, Kenya. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, as her father spoke the words they'd been avoiding for months. The dementia's real, but it's progressing faster than we initially thought. I have maybe 2 years of cognitive clarity left, and I need to know that everything I've built will be used to help people, not just to make my family richer. Harold stood and walked to the window, overlooking his vast estate. I've watched too many wealthy families destroy their legacies through greed and selfishness. I needed to find someone who could carry on Timothy's mission. Someone who would make the right choices even when no one was watching. He turned back to Kenya. The scholarship fund is real. The $50 million is real. But that's just the beginning. I'm restructuring my entire fortune, $2.8 billion, into a charitable trust, and I want you to run it. Kenya's mouth fell open. That's impossible. I'm a nurse from the South Side. I don't know anything about managing billions of dollars. You know the most important thing, Harold replied. You know the value of human life. You know what it means to serve others. The financial details can be handled by experts. What I need is someone with unshakable moral character to guide the vision. Sarah stepped forward, holding another document. Kenya, this trust would fund healthcare initiatives, educational programs, and emergency assistance for families in crisis across the entire country. You would have the power to save thousands of lives every year. But Harold held up his hand. Before you answer, there's one more thing you need to know. The reason I staged the airport encounter wasn't just to test your character in private. It was to test your reaction when the whole world was watching. He pulled out his phone and showed Kenya the latest social media metrics. The story of your kindness has been shared over 50 million times. You've received over 10,000 messages from people who were inspired to help others. 3 suicide hotlines reported increased calls from people who said your story gave them hope. Kenya stared at the numbers, overwhelmed by the reach of what she thought was a simple act of kindness. But here's the real test, Harold continued. Now that you know you were being watched, now that you know I manipulated the situation, do you regret helping me? Do you wish you had minded your own business and caught your flight? Kenya looked at this powerful man who had orchestrated an elaborate deception, then at Sarah, whose tears revealed the pain of watching her father's mind slowly fade, then at the folders full of evidence of lives that could be saved. Her answer would determine not just her own future, but the futures of countless people she would never meet. Kenya sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, processing everything she had learned. The weight of Harold's offer was staggering. $2.8 billion to distribute as she saw fit, the power to transform healthcare for millions of people, and the responsibility of carrying on a dying man's final wish. I need to ask you something, Kenya finally said. looking directly into Harold's eyes. That night at the airport, when you were confused and scared, how much of that was acting? Harold's composure cracked slightly. The confusion was real, Kenya. The acting coach taught me to exaggerate symptoms I already experience. But the fear, the gratitude when you helped me, the connection I felt, all of that was completely genuine. And your grandson Timothy, does he really know about this plan? Sarah answered this time. Timothy is 16 now. When Dad told him about restructuring the fortune, Tim said something that surprised us both. He said, "Grandpa, I don't want to be rich because of money I never earned. I want to be rich because I helped people like Kenya does." Harold smiled at the memory. Timothy wants to become a nurse because of you. He's volunteering at the Children's Hospital every weekend, and he's already been accepted to Northwestern's nursing program. Kenya felt her perspective shifting. So this isn't really about me at all, is it? This is about creating a system that will outlast all of us. Exactly, Harold said. I could leave my money to my children and grandchildren, but that would just create another generation of wealthy people who never learned the value of service. Instead, I want to create a legacy of compassion. Kenya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds. In the distance, she could see Lake Michigan, the same lake where she had saved Timothy's life months earlier. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want complete transparency. No more deception, no more staged scenarios. If we're going to change lives, we do it honestly. Agreed, Harold said immediately. And I want Timothy involved. Not as a figurehead, but as a real partner. If he's going to inherit this responsibility someday, he needs to understand it from the ground up. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. He would love that. Kenya turned back to face them. One final condition. The Marcus Williams Memorial Fund. I want that to be our first major initiative. Every child who dies because their family can't afford medical care is a failure of our system. If we're going to do this, we start by fixing that. Harold's eyes filled with tears. Kenya, you just proved that I chose the right person. 3 months later, at the first Marcus Williams Memorial Fund announcement, Kenya stood before a crowd of reporters, medical professionals and families who had been helped by the program. Timothy Morrison stood beside her, no longer the scared boy who had nearly drowned, but a confident young man ready to dedicate his life to serving others. 6 months ago, Kenya began, I helped an elderly man at an airport because it was the right thing to do. I had no idea that simple act would lead to this moment. But I've learned something important. Kindness isn't about the recognition you receive, it's about the chain reaction you create. In the audience, Marcus Williams' mother wiped away tears as Kenya announced that the fund would provide free cardiac surgery for any child who needed it, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Harold Morrison, now using a wheelchair but still mentally sharp, watched from the front row as Kenya outlined their plans to revolutionize healthcare access across America. After the ceremony, as reporters packed up their equipment and the crowd dispersed, Kenya found herself alone with Harold for a moment. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if I had just walked past you that night at the airport? Harold smiled. I don't have to wonder. I know exactly what would have happened. You would have helped the next person who needed it, because that's who you are. That's why this was never really about finding you, Kenya. This was about recognizing something that was already there. As the sun set over Chicago, Kenya realized that sometimes the most life-changing moments don't announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they come disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings in crowded airport terminals, where the only choice is between walking away or stepping forward to help. She had stepped forward, and in doing so, had stepped into a future she never could have imagined.